Like I said, hello everyone. Thanks for coming to our event today about change making in the workplace. My name is Ismenia and I am one of the career fellows who will be co-monitoring this event.
I'm Jessie. I'm the other career fellow that will be co-moderating today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cheryl Rosenberg, Assistant Director and Career Advisor in the Career Center. And I will be managing technology and chat during this event. So we will have time at the end for a Q&A, but if you have comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat and message them directly to me throughout the event. I'll be working in the questions that you ask or saving them for the end Q&A time.
We hope this panel today can begin to inspire or at least clarify one aspect of all the big uncertainties of transitioning to a job or workplace. Before we get started, I wanted to share some context about why we wanted to host this event. Historically, we know that workplaces can be entrenched with unjust ideals and systems. In the wake of many racial injustice movements last summer, we've all had to wrestle and grapple with this elevated awareness that might have come with many questions, such as how do we bring the tools and skills that we've learned along the way to challenge injustices in the workplace? How do I know and grow confident in the sort of influence I can have in advocating for change in the workplace? I know that I have certainly sat with these myself. We all want to learn how to apply to what we learn to make workspaces more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And I'm really looking forward to learning from the panelists and their experiences, and I'm happy they've joined us today. Unfortunately, Liz Jacob was not able to join us this afternoon. So with that, I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. Gabby, you can start us off. Can you briefly tell us a little about who you are, what you do, and how you see yourself as a change maker in the workplace?
Sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Gabby. It says Gabrielle. Gabby just means we've actually chatted, so feel free to call me Gabby. But my role right now is I'm a diversity, inclusion, and belonging program manager at a software company called HubSpot. I graduated from Tufts in 2013, and a little bit about that role. So basically, I work on our diversity, inclusion, and belonging, DIB is what we call it, team at HubSpot. And I work specifically with our product and engineering teams, really simply put, to help them to make sure that they can meet and exceed their DIB goals. So I can kind of get into a little bit about how we think about that later. But yeah, that's who I am.
Can go next. Hi, everyone. Glad to be back to Tufts virtually today. My name is Phuong and I graduated from class of 2016. While at Tufts, I was in the first cohort of Black Scholar program. I was working closely with Dr. Robert Mack, and I see Donna Esposito in the room today. And she was one of my mentors when I was at Tufts, and also see Evelyn O'Campbell in the room, was in the cohort after me. So really glad to see you today. Currently work as an executive search consultant at Isaacson Mueller. So our firm recruit leader for mission-driven organizations, and the majority of them are colleges and university. We also work with nonprofit, K-12 foundation and the like, and have a commitment to bringing people from underrepresented backgrounds to senior leadership positions.
Okay, I guess that's me. Hi, everyone. I'm Reema Elghossain. I am the Vice President of Talent, Equity, and Inclusion at the 4A's Foundation. Basically, what that means is I work in a nonprofit that services the advertising industry at large and the creative industry. And what we do is really service them by supporting them with their diversity, equity, and inclusion needs and initiatives. And so the 4A's is a trade association. And we have been doing that through our own programs and initiatives like MAPE, which is our Multicultural Advertising Intern program. And we do partner with Tufts very often to be able to find fellows and interns to bring them into the industry. And so MAPE is a 48-year-old program that helps bring people of color that are juniors, seniors, and grad students into the advertising industry and now in the creative industry. And we continue to build that pipelines through working through high schools and also talent once they're in the industry as well too. So we have programs like Vanguard, which is a pathway to promotion for Black talent. We have scholarships and awards. And like I said, we work with high schools with advertising tracks. So that's really the change that I make for the industry. And I think in DE&I is the programming and the initiatives that we lead and the service that we provide, like benchmarks and manifestos for an entire industry. I'm also a Lebanese American woman. I'm from Jersey. And I bring that with everything I do too.
Awesome. Thank you all. So with that, can you each talk a little bit about how did you end up where you are today, specifically doing DE and I work?
I can start again. So for me, the DEI work, I've been involved in it either tangentially or actually in a role for a little while. So while I was an undergrad, I actually was a diversity recruitment intern for the undergrad admissions office. So that was like my first official kind of title into this work. But actually before that, I was in an academic program for high school. It's called A Better Chance, also known as ABC, where I was a boarding student, and I like moved away from home. And that actually was the introduction. I didn't realize it, but to like DEI programming, just the fact that it existed, I was, the diversity being brought to that school and that environment. So that was actually sort of like the foundation for me. But in regards to like actually being able to do the work, I was, again, with undergrad admissions, I was a diversity recruitment intern. And then I actually went back to that program after I finished at Tufts and went back as a tutor. So not in a DEI role specifically, but again, kind of working with those types of programs. And then I came back to Tufts and I was in grad admissions, working as a grad admissions assistant. But, for us, especially at Tufts and in admissions office, DEI was really infused into the work that we were doing. And then I joined HubSpot and I was working in a completely different thing. I was doing customer success. But I was really involved in our employee resource groups and DIMB, as we call it, efforts at HubSpot. And then now I'm in the role that I am in today.
Happy to go next again, or if you want to go, Reema. So I think because of the identities that I carry and my lived experience, I've always been drawn to mission-driven work. When I came to Tufts, I was also new to the US as an immigrant from Vietnam. And I didn't think that I would go to college to study about race, but that's what I end up doing. And to this day, I still cannot fully explain to my family what exactly I studied in college. I majored in American study, by the way. But what my time at Tufts did for me was exposing me to the many different oppression system and the systemic inequities that exist in this world. So after graduating from Tufts, I went to work in college access and college transition work at the Policy Foundation. And I was based in the Houston office. And in my work, I recruited and supported predominantly first-gen low-income students of colors at Bryn Mawr College and UT Austin. And during that time, I realized how school often said that they want to bring in the student from historically marginalized background, say DACA undocumented student, but they're not aware or prepared to provide the support or resources that these students need to succeed. So I decided I want to learn more about how higher education works and how I can impact change from within. And that's when I decided to pursue my master's degree at Stanford Graduate School of Education. I focus on higher education and nonprofit leadership there. And when I decided to go to grad school, I thought that one day I would want to work my way up to become a dean of students, to work in student affairs. But that's when I also got recruited to my current job, and I realized I can also play a role to impact change at a larger scale by helping organizations to find leaders who also committed to social impact and change. And that's why I'm end up where I am right now.
That's a great question. So, because I think people who do DE&I always just have a completely different start where it gets to, but I think you always have a passion for it, right? Like there's something that to do this work, you have to feel connected to it in some way. And so it's really interesting to even already hear both of your stories because we all have completely different ways that we got here. I think for me, my interest probably started when I was just a kid. Like I think I mentioned, I was, I'm a Lebanese American woman. So when I was in home, I was like raised to be Lebanese and then went to school and then learned how to be American. And so it was understanding like race and the American experience and just how different things worked. I think I sometimes felt like I was in it, obviously living it, but then on the outside kind of watching it at the same time. I was really fascinated with people and culture and understanding like what was going on in this world. And then I started off in publishing and was bored and then ended up working in higher education. And so I was an assistant director of student activities for a long time at a couple different community colleges in New Jersey and started building out like leadership development. And then I worked for a National Leadership Society, an honor society with colleges across the country for like 6.5 years. And I built leadership development curriculums and programs. And it started becoming like more talent development and then focusing on diversity, equity, and inclusion within, college campuses. And it just kept growing. And then I brought that over to the 4As and first started it with really focusing on partnerships within the industry about it, but then moved into this role and really got into being like kind of the North Star for the industry on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But I feel like it's been ingrained in every part, whenever you're talking about leadership development and you're talking about building leaders and building teams and organizational development, you can't not have diversity, equity, and inclusion as like the big part of that. And so, yeah, we all come like in completely different ways, but it's cool to know that we're all doing meaningful work. So thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah, of course, thank you all for sharing your paths. It's really nice to hear. My next question, and you can stay in the same order that you've been answering, or you can jump around, whatever. What are some of the main challenges that have come up in your respective works as you work towards more inclusive, equitable, and diverse workspaces?
Well, I'll say for me, the advertising industry is not diverse at all. It's really bad. So it's sometimes challenging when I'm working. I have like this pretty unique experience. I get to work with a whole bunch of different organizations, right? And so I'm talking to agencies and I'm talking to DE&I leaders that work at those organizations. And I'm talking to people who care very much and understand and like know the needs. But I think it's really hard to be a DE&I leader within an organization because you're kind of tasked with almost like an impossible task. So like, to have to change an entire organization, but not have many resources and much, really power to do anything, right? And then having to be the face of that and, have a lot of people looking to you to make the change is a lot, I think, of pressure. And so it's not really an easy role. People think DE&I like is glamorous, I think, but it's really hard, And so that's probably one of the most challenging things I would say is we can bring programs, we can bring ideas, but it's not one person's responsibility to do diversity, equity, and inclusion. You literally need every single person at an organization to be involved and to be part of it. But the pressure and responsibility is on usually one person or maybe a team. So I think that's the biggest challenge, is making change with not as much power as people think we do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that absolutely comes up. So like when people will talk to me like, oh, we're trying to start ERGs at our company, whatever, we're trying to like embark on this strategy. That's when like I see that come up a lot. Like you have to make sure that the resources are there, because if there's no resources to work with, then what are we doing? You have to make sure that the onus and accountability is not on one central person, which is impossible because you are not the sole decision maker unless you own this company. It should not just be on you. And really making sure that everyone understands like how they can get involved and also how we're holding people accountable. So I feel like that absolutely comes up. I think really, I'm so glad that at least at HubSpot, we really formally started this work 2015. So I feel like we're in like a different phase now, which is like really great for us because we have the leadership buy-in, we have the resources, we have a whole built out team, and it's like continuing to grow. But for us, the big challenge is on the global diversity, global DI&B strategy, right? Like, transparently, all of the DI&B team is based out of the US, but we have offices in like 8 other countries, and we're all about being global first. And like, this is a big turning point for us on like, what does that mean? Because it's not a copy and paste. And so we're really trying to get in, especially in like Europe. That's our second biggest office, as we think about, okay, how do we actually create the resources that are going to empower teams in those regions to now like pick up the baton and do the next leg of the race. Like, what does that actually look like? And so we're really trying to dive in. And it's not only about like, it's one, who's in the room too, right? Like if all of your leadership is located again in one particular region, that's going to really skew how it's implemented, what the strategy is going forward. But it's also like the smaller things too. And thinking about, we usually send resources to managers and teams and stuff. And are all of our resources out of like publications in the US? Like, how can we also make sure that we're keeping ourselves up to date about what's going on and ultimately affecting all of our employees, because they don't just only exist in the US. So the global DEI work is like really big thing for us this year.
Thinking about my particular line of work, because I do recruit people. I do work with a lot of people of color, or women, or folks from background who might not have been given the opportunity to be in leadership position before. And the challenge I see when I'm working with my clients, they might be more drawn towards particular candidate who've been in a traditional pathway to leadership, who might come from the Stanford, the Harvard, the Tufts, the Yale of the world, and they might have bias against school that might not deem as prestigious, or might not be willing to look beyond the traditional path. So how I can work with them and remind them of that implicit bias that they might have, and to consider if they really commit to change with that organization that they say they do, how can they really expand what they deem as the cultural fit. How they can really interrogate the implicit bias that they bring into the search that we work with them, to make sure that they don't just gonna end up with the same kind of leadership that's been existing in the company for a long time, which is predominantly white male. So that's the kind of work that I do every day, and it's not always easy to have the kind of conversation, because at the end of the day, I'm still brought in as a consultant. I don't have decision-making power, but the reason why they work with us because of those conversations that we can push them on, we can nudge them on, we can remind them on. Not easy work, but I think given everything that's going on in our country and the world recently, especially with the national unrest from last year, organizations are now more open to having that conversation. It's uncomfortable, but they need to have it now.
And if I can add, it's a game of inches. It's not a game of miles. So change is like slow, because of what you just shared too is one reason, because you have to explain what's happening, right? And then what the change is that needs to be made. And it's not something, I mean, a lot of industries love data, but data only tells like one part of a story, and you could use data to really make up whatever story you want, right? I work in advertising, so I've seen it. But to be able to talk, like I speak to my CEO about pay equity, you know, she believes in pay equity and she wants pay equity, but she doesn't even understand if there is pay equity or not, right? And so you have to walk them through that part first. Like you said, it's hard to talk about bias because a lot of people don't want to feel like they have it. So it's a really hard buy-in, but you have to be okay with just moving 1 inch at a time. And that's not always what the head of the organization wants. And it's also not what the people want, but that's literally sometimes the only thing you can do.
Awesome. I think those were really good answers. Thank you all. I wanted to jump in one more question just as a follow-up. But first, just wanted to also add that from what Gabby mentioned about ERGs, those are employee resource groups. So you can just read that in the chat. And then my follow-up question would be, could you talk about a specific problem, a specific project each of you kind of tackled for diversity, equity, and inclusion? And especially you talked already about how there might not be a lot of resources or power as much as expected in that kind of work. So given that, like, how did you manage the struggles there? And I know, Reema, you talked about pay equity. So if you wanted to expand on that, we'd love to hear from all of you.
Yeah, I can expand on that. Like I mentioned, I service the industry, but what I also do is I have a team of my own. And so I run a business. And so I think for me, the most impactful part of the D&I work that I've done is what I've done for my own team. So I run a team of right now, all women of color, and we're about to add 5 more people to our team. And it's very important for me that I lead by the example I want the industry to do, you know? So I had to have I created a whole business plan and a new budget and everything for the year. and wanted to right size my team, because what I found out, last year by asking a lot of questions, right? Last year was the year to ask a lot of questions if you ever felt scared to do it before, but asking a lot of questions and finding out that myself included and my team were experiencing some pay equity gaps, right, within our own organization. And so one, it's having to have those tough conversations, and then saying, okay, I'm doing this for me, I'm doing this for my team, I'm doing this for everybody else that comes after us, right? And so how do I put in this big proposal for pay equity within my own organization and what I think is right? And that took like a lot of weeks and months of like stress and pain. And then really just learning how to like have a really deep, formal and direct conversation about it, and was able to get pay equity for not just for my team, but for the entire organization. And that's now like the mission for the year. And so talking about like racial and gender pay equity is a tough thing, but now we're using it as a benchmark for what we're going to do for the entire industry. And so I think it's just something that is a really important topic right now, and especially as you're going into your careers, to really start understanding like the impact of what happens with salaries within your industry. We're now creating like blueprints about that for the industry. And so that's something I'm really excited about. In addition to something MAPE, MAPE, as I mentioned, is the Multicultural Advertising Intern Program. It's been around for 48 years. I didn't definitely start it, but what we've done in the last 2 years, we turned it into a virtual program. And we now have 430 fellows that are going to be going in this year, continuing to grow and expand and create opportunities for young people of color in the industry is something I'm really excited and proud about.
For me, I'm actually, my company actually in the work of rolling out ERG, the Employee Resource Group right now. I'm in conversation to start one for queer and trans employees, but the conversation I'm trying to sort out with leadership right now is what are the expectations, what are the resources that they're willing to put behind us? Because right now the idea I think I'm hearing that they want a group to come together to educate the companies on what our group is about or what our identity means. And to be frank, I only have certain energy to educate people on this topic. They need to do their homework as well. And I want more than that. I want more than a space for us to come together and commiserate. It's not going to be a good use of anyone's time if we just have a group to do just that. I want us to be having the power to advocate for ourselves, to ask for additional protection and rights. We recently had Trans Day of Visibility last week, and you probably heard this sentence before, but I believe in that visibility without protection is a trap. So if I wanna ask my fellow coworkers to join me in this ERG, what I can offer them, because otherwise it's gonna be extra emotional burden, extra labor that we have to take on to carry this out, why we have to educate the rest of the firm. And I don't think that's fair for our youth. So before we actually get this ERG start, I wanna get it clear on what we can expect from leadership if we get this off the ground. So that's the conversation I'm having right now.
The first project that comes to mind, I didn't have the, let's say, issue of lack of resources, so it has a pretty good ending. But last year when we created a Black Lives Matter action plan, and it was really important for us that it focus not only on our employees, but also our customers. So I was tasked along with someone from our user experience team to do research on our Black customers and partners. So basically just like agency partners and customers who use our software. And basically the software is meant to help businesses do what they do. So that's like the most simplest way, and probably marketing is upset with me for saying that, but they just help businesses grow. And so what we did was really try to take a hard look at, for the customers who are using our software, what is their experience? So there's like the experience from actually using the tools and how it helps their business, but also HubSpot is really founded on giving value before you extract it. And so there is a whole other experience with working with the company that is contingent on like, how much are you taking away from this experience and not just what are we getting from it? And so that was like basically the two parts of what the research we were doing. And it was super enlightening for me because, as I said, I used to work on customer success and I used to work with our customers before coming into this role. And so, especially being a Black woman, I was always on the lookout for our Black customers in this case. Like, are they there? Especially the agency partner population, which is like much smaller. And probably Reema knows this too, like a lot of white men in agency world. And so whenever, if I ever saw, I was like pumped. And so enlightening and like really rewarding for me to be able to do this work and like really dig deep in, like, what are they experiencing? One, from the side of just using the product, which they were fine with it, but most on the other side of what is the experience that they actually have with HubSpot and the products and the resources, education we provide to them. And I was stunned to say, I was like, wow, I feel like there was parts of this that I wasn't even anticipating. That was like, how did I not think about this when I was in that role, being someone who looked like them? And like, part of me felt a little bit of guilt in that way. But it, as I said, really enlightening experience, really digging deep into like, how can we as a software company actually do more than what you would expect a software company to do? And that was like the big point where we're like, what can we be doing better to serve you? And everyone's like, oh, just like make good software. And it's like, well, no, there's actually so much more with the place that we hold in the industry that like we could be creating spaces for our Black business owners, our women-owned business owners to like come together and convene and have that community. Like, why wouldn't we do something like that? So it was super exciting, and it's caused a lot of like change within the company since then. That, as I said, has like a happy ending, but during that time, it was like, wow, we could, like, it felt like opening Pandora's box in a good way. But that was, you know, at least we had the backing of the company to be able to do stuff like that. And again, be able to then make the promise to our customers that we want to do better. How can we? And just listening to them at the same time.
Cool. Thank you all for sharing, Jesse, especially for that follow-up question. So my next question, as you three come from different career industries and backgrounds, I was wondering if you can speak to some of the big trends in DEI initiatives that you feel like students should know about as they transition out of university into workspaces.
I've been thinking about this one a lot, especially as our team grows, but I'm seeing a huge shift into the depth of the work. And what I mean by that is right now you'll see a lot of DEI, it's just blanket, right? It's really broad, it's across the whole company. But something at least that we're doing at HubSpot is like, I work specifically with product and engineering. So there is a depth within that field. And even more so, we just hired someone for recruiting, DI&B program manager. We have an inclusion and belonging partner that's on HR. So like now we're having these roles pop up outside of the DI&B team. And even as I work with product and engineering more specifically, a lot of the conversations that'll come up is like, how are we building this product equitably? And we think about machine learning and algorithmic bias. And so I really see the opportunity for this industry to go really deep and really specific based on, you know, whatever it is that you're doing, rather than I'm the DI practitioner for the whole company. And what does that mean? Because as I think both other panelists said, this work is showing up in more than just, it's so much bigger. It's multifaceted. It doesn't exist within a vacuum. And so you have to really analyze all of the systems at play. And there's some expertise that will come from that based on what it is you're trying to do. But I really see a depth coming soon down the line.
I agree. In my line of work, it's in the past year we've seen many colleges and universities now having inaugural vice president for DEI or chief diversity officer growth for the first time in the college. Because, you know, it's the time they cannot really look away from having one, but also have to understand now that it's not enough to just have a figurehead without no power, without no support, without no central leadership back them up. So university and college specifically now realize they have to elevate this person that they hope to bring into the campus and making clear it's a shared responsibility of the cabinet, of the leadership of the campus, not just one person to change the whole school dynamic. And that work takes time. And right now they're also focused on more data. We talk about bringing more diversity for student admission. What are we doing with retention? Can we back that up with data? So I know now people are not just willing to just have one person be the head of DEI and that's it. They need to have support, they have to have resources for programming, and they just have results or outcome to focus on for that.
Yeah, I mean, you both said it so well. Maybe if I add to that, it's, I think something big that's happening is that employees are starting to understand that they can use their voices and they can start asking questions and they can start wanting to know, and I think that's really important. And I think there's an accountability that you both talked about that's spot on. It's like it's no more like put your logo on something that means you care about it, or just, write out a statement. It's like, well, what are you doing about it? And a lot of different programming is happening, and a lot more of the people within the organization are starting to understand and get involved. And I think the equity, right? I think diversity was really, they kept talking about diversity, right? And then a lot of times industries notice like, okay, we can bring a lot of people in, but people of color are leaving. And so that means they're not having a good experience. So I can bring you 500,000 fellows and help them get jobs, but then they're in there for 3 years and then they leave. So retention is now something that people are noticing, and that's directly tied towards the equity and inclusivity and the belonging, as Gabby mentioned, right? Is like, that is the most important part. And so I think people are starting to focus more on that component, and that's, a harder thing to do, but it requires a lot more accountability, as you both mentioned.
Awesome, thank you for that. So Reema, you talked about like employees can ask questions in the workplace, not just people doing DEI. And then Phuong, you also talked about how it's everyone's responsibility to kind of try to affect change and then support these initiatives. Do you have any advice for what we as students doing internships or recent grads, especially being like new to the workforce, can do to affect change in our workplaces, or strategies to kind of approach this from our positions?
To me personally, I think a bit of humility goes a long way in the sense of acknowledging the history and the context of the place that you're coming in. Because there might already be people who commit to doing this work and been setting things up. So I think it's important to come in and learn and observe first what's already out there, and then be strategic with finding your people, building your community, and then putting out your ideas and figuring out what role you want to play in that organization. But yeah, always be strategic about your ideas and who you connect with is a key thing for me.
Yeah, I think Phuong, like honoring that history that may exist is like super important, and definitely to humble yourself. I will also say that absolutely bringing your perspective and challenging what's already in place. And of course that will look different based on the culture of the space, and by challenge, I mean just asking the question, oh, why do we do it like this? Something simple as that. Because, and depending on like the attrition rate of that company, there might be people who have been there since its inception, right? And they just kind of know the way things are. And so don't be afraid to kind of ask those questions to help, one, prime them like, oh, hey, I've never thought about why we put this on the left and not on the right. Didn't, but I think it also is like being cognizant of like that culture. And I don't want to take that away, because that can be a privilege sometimes, being able to use your voice and not have to feel afraid of retaliation. Obviously you don't want that, but that may be the reality for some. And so picking and choosing when you do say or bring something up is like totally, I will respect that, because I understand that there's a privilege in being able to speak. I think the other thing that is important to understand too is that sometimes change does not mean like you change the company's mission statement. Change can be that you've helped to provide a much better experience to someone else. So there's change in the big and there's change in the small. And so being able to understand like when you can leverage your voice in some of those instances is a super powerful thing to lean into.
Those were good. I would say if you want to talk about it in a DE&I space, like come in trying to identify what your role is that you play within an organization, right? Like, are you an ally? Are you going to be actively involved? Are you going to do some of the things that you both mentioned, like Gabby mentioned, like just even ask questions and question things is an important thing. I think this is a new time where young people who are getting jobs, whether they're entry level, are coming in asking more about a company and more from a company. So don't feel uncomfortable doing that. And when I speak with a lot of young people that are coming to the industry, there's a lot of imposter syndrome, and that doesn't always go away, right? I'm still recovering. I'm a recovering perfectionist as we speak. So I see so many young people coming in, competing with each other, especially young people of color, because it feels like we're all coming from a place of lack, and there's like limited opportunity when you might be the only person in the room that looks like you, or the only person on your team. And it's not, right? There's abundance, there's enough. You just have to believe that we need to continue to push industries to make space for more people, but don't compete with each other. That's what I'll say. Don't compete with each other. Like, you'll need support. One of you will get promoted faster, and then the other person will refer a person. And just like that community, as you mentioned, is so important. So don't come in freaking out. It figures itself out. But just figure out what your role is and what you want to play in the world. And sometimes it's different hats at different times.
Definitely don't compete with each other. Don't let them do that to you. Also, that work doesn't have to start once you actually enter the building. That happens during when you're talking to folks, trying to get an understanding of the company, when you're during the interview process. Like, that's really where it all can begin. So don't feel like you have to hold back because you're trying to make yourself look better and not ruffle feathers. Like, being able to ask those questions too, like, oh, what is your company's DEI strategy? Or being able to ask those questions then is super important too. One, giving you an insight into what they're doing, how they're thinking about it, but also maybe if you want to be there or not, you learn those things beforehand.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. It was really wonderful to hear. Final question is, three of you mentioned, there's definitely so much passion behind the kind of work that you do. You need that passion to do that. I was wondering if someone many of us here are passionate of making change in the workplace, whether that's in the primary role or regardless of what your function is, what are the qualities and skills that you would suggest we should be cultivating? I know you've talked about this in the previous question, but is there anything else you want to share or emphasize more?
So to be honest, when I first got invited to be on this panel, I was a bit confused because I think I don't identify with being a change maker in the workplace. I think for me, when I hear the word, it's easy to imagine someone who does some big work, being disruptor, comes to shake things up. And certainly that can be one meaning of the label. And then I remember having this conversation with a friend, and she shared with me a map by Diba Iyer about the roles that we can play in a social change ecosystem. So something like Gabby and Reema mentioned. So disruptor being one of those roles, but there's also other important roles that you can play to impact change. So storyteller, healer, builder, etc. And for me, I see myself as a guide, a caregiver, and a builder. So for example, when I share that I work with a lot of a women or people of color in my work, or people from first-gen background, and many of them haven't had the experience with executive search process. And might not feel comfortable or be as outspoken when talking about their accomplishment. Because being a first-gen student and immigrant myself, I know firsthand how difficult it can be to brag about ourselves because we raised to be humble. So in my work with them, then I can try to guide them through the process, trying to advocate for them in front of my client, trying to let them to add value to their development. So even though if they don't end up being hired by my client, our time working together still means something to them. And I feel like that's one role I can play instead of just changing what the whole culture of my industry is about. If that work takes time, and that's what takes a lot of time, and not just one person can do that.
Wow, I love that. I have not heard of that, so I'm gonna need to look that up after. And so when we got this question, I thought about it, and then I hope it's not in total opposition to what Reema was saying about data, but data is a really huge thing, both qualitative and quantitative, and you can't try and make business impact without it. So thinking about how to be data minded, but also thinking about the story that you're trying to tell, but also what is the story that's going to be most compelling to that business leader? Because really what they're thinking about is how can we make the most scalable business impact? And while certain situations might be not great or awful, but they could be one-off, like, does that really mean it's a trend? And so how can we think about making the biggest amount of impact, but also understanding that it's inches, not miles, as Reema said, but knowing like who you're speaking to and who is your audience. Now, that doesn't mean you can't use the same data or information, but it's how you really present it. You have to make sure people are hearing you, and people hear different things. And so with this work, while it can be so passion driven, you do need to kind of back it up with data. So always being data minded in that way, to really help you tell your story in a way that the other person is going to hear it.
No, she's absolutely right. Data is so important. I don't always like it, but data is so important, right? You can't just, it's a fact, you can't just go into talk to any CEO or leader and be like, but listen, you have to care. And they're gonna be like, okay, I'll give you $4 billion. Like, they're not gonna do that. You have to show the data and why the facts matter. And you also have to show that there's a problem with data as well too. So I totally agree with you. I'm just glad I don't have to be the one who does all the research and data, because that's not my thing. But if you belonging, because there's so many components of it, but a skill set is like one, and like first, I think, what are your core values too? Like understanding where I think it's really important to know where you stand in certain things, right? And what are your core values? So really figuring out what that is, and because what are you passionate about, and why are you connected to doing this work? Because it's not easy, even if you're just an employee, right? The different roles you play as you're talking, your role could be like, I'm just going to be a good person and, try to create positive impact around me and my team. It doesn't have to be, I'm going to be good, the leader of the ERG either, but that find out what role it is that you play, and start finding your voice, I think, is a big skill set, knowing who you can talk to, where you can share what you're feeling and what's bothering you. And if you see something, being that ally to do it. So I think a big skill set is just finding your voice and finding a place where you can feel comfortable at work to be able to talk to.
Awesome, thank you. So with that, we're gonna transition to some questions that came in from the chat. And then if you have another one, you can feel free to pop it right over in a direct message to Cheryl Rosenberg. So this question reads, what advice do you have for students just starting to navigate if something feels wrong in the workplace and they are nervous to ask questions, like if I'm second guessing myself and I don't know if something is actually wrong?
I mean, maybe talk to somebody that's not in your workplace first. I think if you don't know if something's wrong, it is important to find someone that you feel like you can trust to just bounce off the question and the idea, because otherwise you're going to keep it to yourself. And I don't advise that. If something doesn't feel right, there's a reason, and what I know in this space too is something could not offend me, but could totally offend somebody else. And so if something does feel wrong to you and doesn't feel comfortable, it doesn't mean anybody else has to feel uncomfortable for it to matter. And so try to find somebody, if you want to bounce off that idea and feel comfortable with, is there someone that you trust that you can talk to? There's always an HR and hopefully a DE&I leader that you can connect with as well too. But knowing like it's okay to just say, I'm not sure if this is weird, but this makes me feel weird. So can I talk about it? You know, I think is the most important thing. And just knowing where your resources are. That's what I would say.
Definitely plus one. I was going to say, you know, it's really important when you join a new space to kind of identify some people who can serve as confidants, whether that is your manager, hopefully that's like the best outcome, right? Or if it's someone who's on another team, or maybe someone who is your teammate who has a similar role or kind of understands the org that you're in, that's always great, right? To kind of bounce off ideas with them. Same thing with HR, business partners. Usually there will be those people that you can talk to. But also identifying all of the other resources, kind of to Reema's point, that exist for employees that you can tap into. We have a couple of external resources that we can use and just kind of gut check whether something is right or wrong, or if we're feeling any type of way that could help you sort of plan out what your next steps would be if it isn't okay. But yeah, definitely identify early on what resources are available to you as an employee, whether those are internal or external.
So Reema and Gabby already make really good points. Just want to echo the point Reema you made earlier about imposter syndrome. Still feeling it, still recovering from it. Then it's easy to doubt ourselves, but I feel like one thing I'm still working on is trusting myself, trusting my narrative, and don't let people write your narrative for you. And also don't let yourself be gaslit. So that's why it's so important to have someone to speak to and to bounce ideas off. So it just doesn't feel like it's just me feeling this way. It's just me being unreasonable. So it's very important to find both confident within the workplace, but also outside for your sanity.
That was really great. Thank you. I really like the idea of like finding supports both inside and outside of the workplace. One thing I'm wondering about is like a few of you have talked about imposter syndrome. And I think like finding that support, like just in my communities at Tufts, has been really important for me to challenge imposter syndrome. I'm wondering like what else helps you kind of break out of that and like frame your mindset that like you trust your narrative.
Therapy has helped. But basically I will question myself in a good way, the way that my therapist would. And so after doing this for a couple of years, it's always okay to have the first feeling. That's not wrong. It's what you do after. And so I usually check myself like, Gabby, what's really happening here? You usually do this. Is this right? Just kind of maybe this is something you can just kind of push through. So highly recommend therapy for everyone, but that's usually how I tackle it, but still recovering from it as of this morning. So.
Second therapy, amen to that. Yeah, so similar to therapy, it's like having people that you know can help you. Like imposter syndrome is like two parts. It's how you feel, right? And then it's like the patterns that you created based on those feelings too. So it's, you know, if I feel like a superhero and I want to, you know, do everything, some of the patterns I create is I take on everything and I take on too much and then I burn out and then I'm crashing for months until like I have to recover. And every year I get older, the harder it gets, right? So I started building those patterns and I started realizing what is actually impacting me. Like, yes, I can go at 1,000,000 miles per hour and accomplish a lot of great things. And then I crash for a couple months and you won't even see me. That's not healthy. That's depression, that leads to anxiety. And it's a struggle, right? So I'm learning every day, still I'm 38 years old, about like how to change the patterns that I've created due to the imposter syndrome. And that's not easy. And so I don't know if I'm even answering the question, but thank you for letting me be vulnerable. Imposter syndrome is a struggle. And it's something that you kind of have to check yourself both on like, why am I procrastinating on this? Or why did I just say yes to something I'm not comfortable with? Or why am I, not asking anyone for help because I feel like I need to do it myself? Or if I'm not figuring it out right away, I'm not good at it. It's like all these random thoughts and it's silencing that voice and then trying to realize like how that's impacting me and what I can do for both of those things. And I do a lot of meditation and affirmation meditation. So I wake up in the morning and I'm like, I am great. And even if I don't feel like it, it does change my energy. So that helps as well too.
I recently read a Harvard Business Review article you might have seen circulate around. Stop telling women that they have imposter syndrome. Because recognize when is you and when is the environment that you in. And I know I don't identify as a woman, but still find the article really great. Highly recommend. And also to recognize when your inner critics is being helpful, being abusive. That's also an advice I learned recently about how to not be our worst critics, and knowing when self-awareness is good for our own development, our own growth, but also when it's just keeping us down. And also, again, recognize the environment that we're in and don't just take the blame for it.
That's a good point too, because there's abusive places that bring out feelings of imposter syndrome, and that's a really valid point. And it's not, you know, it got created from somewhere. So I definitely need to check that article out.
Well, thank you all so much. I loved hearing what you shared, and the spaces welcome your vulnerability and honesty. We really appreciate everything that you shared. Our final question that's came in the chat is the following. Can you speak to how you think about the idea of self-care as you balance work in your life? As well as you can speak to your strategies or tips on how to prevent burnout in doing this kind of work.
I was talking about this recently, and I think I have a different obstacle that I'm trying to get over than others. So I usually choose myself first. I don't feel like I have an issue with what people perceive as the self-care. I'm usually like, no, I don't want to do that because I don't want to. I want to sit here and watch TV, and I'll do that. But for me, what true self-care needs to be is when I need to tell myself no, because those actions can sometimes lead me to avoidance. And so I need to say, no, you actually need to sit here and keep doing work because, or whatever it is. Sometimes I have to actually tell myself no, which is how I see as self-care. But I know I think that's not usually the case for a lot of other people. I will not miss a meal. I'm not going to work through lunch. I'm just not going to do it because my body tells me I need to eat. So I'm going to stop. So for me, it's telling myself no in the times that I need that push.
I think a lot of us been still struggling with transitioning to doing everything in the virtual world. I mean, for an introvert myself, I don't mind not having my long commute in the train every day, but also being at home, working for the past 1 year made me realize I do work longer hours. And I have to take a step back and tell myself that this is who I want to be right now. This is who I want to be for the next year. This is not sustainable. And sometimes just taking time for myself to take a walk before I get to work or after. I still think that critical and transformational to just my own well-being, to making time for yourself in the world that tell you to constantly plug in, especially that is so tempting to right now when work at home and home is work. I think the same at school as well. So making time for yourself always. And I like what Gabby said. I don't like to use my lunchtime for anything else. I use my lunchtime for my lunch because I need that for my sanity as well.
I'm still working on the lunch thing. So maybe you guys can give me some tips, but I think what we're talking about is, like you said, boundaries, right? And so I totally agreed. When COVID hit, I started realizing like, wow, this is too much. And I started realizing that I've been like a workaholic my whole life. And so I'm starting to decide like, what are boundaries for me too? And I started changing my mindset and taking a little bit more accountability, right? Because it's like, yeah, I answer emails all weekend, but nobody's telling me to do that. I'm doing that because I think I need to do that, right? So I had to just create boundaries and expectations of myself. I'm not going to work on the weekends, even if somebody wants me to, or I'm not going to work this many hours. Like you said, the lunch thing I'm still struggling with, but trying to get to that point where and I don't. And in the first month I didn't answer emails on weekends, I was like having withdrawal symptoms. It was a struggle. And then now you'll never catch me answering email on a weekend. It's not happening. But that takes like a commitment to myself. And like you said, self-care can be a lot of different things, but what is your commitment to yourself? Because I needed boundaries for me. I needed to be able to tell my team, I'm not having meetings on Fridays, so don't schedule them. And no one died and everything was okay and the emails get answered. And so just giving myself grace and not feeling like I'm doing something wrong if I'm not working. That's been a big lesson for me.
Awesome. Thank you all. And Reema, I loved what you said just now about like a commitment to myself. Because from what I hear, like you all give so much of yourselves to your work, to other people, and to your missions. So I really love that, like a reminder that we should do that as well. So with that, I think we can close our panel. And I just wanted to say thanks again to everyone that came and a huge thank you to our panelists. We recognize that many, if not all, workplaces can do the work to be more equitable. So we hope that for everyone that attended, you can walk away from this conversation feeling a little more empowered with the optimism and belief that everyone here, as students, new grads, young people, and professionals, people of several identities and social positionalities, can have and build the power to make the changes that we want to see. So with that, that's all we have for today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you all.